threatened does sound like shrinking away type of thing, like, and almost a, man, I hope they don't.
Right.
Like, you more put it on them versus challenged sounds like, okay,
I wish
bet.
a motherfucker would.
Welcome to the Second Plan A podcast, where we take hard-earned lessons from the mats and convert them into tools for navigating life's challenges. I'm Amber Hoover. I'd rather stick to the plan.
And I am Ryan Hoover, and I did not plan a witty thing to say here.
Oh, man. That's all right. I guess we'll still move on to our Second Plan A.
Well, if our sound checks were any indication of how this is going to go, it might be a little rough.
I think we got to 4, but persisted, kept moving on to second plans, and figured it out. On this episode, we're exploring how people adapt to stress in different areas of life, from the calmness of trained fighters in the ring to navigating high-pressure jobs or chaotic home lives. Are you ready to put some pressure on the pressure that's pushing down on me?
I don't know anything about any of those things
that's
you just
pushing
said.
down on you. I know you know that last line.
I don't know any of it.
I think you know all of it. All right, so I want to start with the pressure point of this episode.
Okay.
I want to start off by talking about our first tech-infused black belt testing of sorts.
Okay.
The Fit to Fight Krav Maga black belt tests are 3 days of fighting, rolling, drilling, shooting scenarios, anything that has to do with violence, fitness, they pretty much get thrown at them. And I believe it was somewhere around 2016 that we introduced heart rate monitors to some of the solo scenarios that we ran. Does that sound right?
Sure.
2016-ish? I don't know. It was a while ago, but...
I think it was maybe the first one that Raul was involved in.
That sounds right, yeah.
That sounds about around that
the time frame.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we were out at a range. At that point, it wasn't our private range, but it was another private range that allowed us to use their facility, and it was pretty cool. We were on a big open piece of land. We pretty much had our run of the place, and so
1,000,000 degrees outside.
it was 1,000,000 degrees outside.
Yep. Great stuff.
Again, part of the whole violence, fitness, go with what you got kind of thing.
Yep.
Here it is.
It's the experience.
So we gave them an experience. We put heart rate monitors on the participants during like an individual scenario where they had to fight off different people and show different skill sets within the fight arena. And then they had to get to a weapon, access the weapon through a lockbox, and put shots on target with a few various changes and differences within it for different people.
Yep.
And so we tracked the heart rates during the course of these events, and what we found was the more experienced fighters didn't have big spikes in their heart rate during the fighting portion. They mostly stayed pretty level. Obviously, heart rates were already elevated from a base rate because of the environment and what we were doing, but they stayed at a relatively normal, even keel level, even through intense fighting. But a lot of times for some of those fighters who weren't experienced with firearms, once they got to that lockbox and had to put their hand on the gun and start getting shots on target, that's when their heart rate spiked, which is, looking outside in, kind of crazy, because the real danger that you feel, the real pressure, was the fighting portion when there is a physical opponent against you versus, okay, if we take a look at putting lead down range, it's, shooting projectile at a stationary target, and there's not a lot of stakes to it. But they weren't acclimated to that type of pressure and stress.
I was real-time monitoring on my phone. It was Bluetooth to the heart rate monitor, and you could see significant spikes in different people at different times of the training, the scenario, the testing. And some people that were maybe more comfortable with the fighting portions, they stayed relatively even. And then once it came to the gun, you could see an immediate spike, even just touching the gun, like before they would present or anything like that, just touching the gun, you would see a spike. And then people that were more familiar with the gun, you would see, the opposite happen. And I think even though the stakes are different, when you're actually fighting other humans, the stakes are much higher, if you think of it from a rational standpoint, than accessing a pistol, shooting paper or steel or whatever. However, it's all about what you get used to. It's all about, I don't think people talk about a stress inoculation. I mean, I think stress mitigation is probably more realistic. I don't know that you can actually inoculate yourself from stress.
The level just changes.
Yeah.
It's kind of like lifting weights. Your heavy is just a different heavy
Yeah.
than somebody just beginning.
Right. So the people that hadn't put nearly as many rounds downrange, it makes sense that their heart. I mean, end of the day, you're managing a small explosion in your hand repeatedly.
Yeah.
You know, it is after you've just been fighting, and if you're not as used to handling those little explosions in your hand as some other people are, then it makes sense that your heart rate is going to spike, especially when you are adrenalized and you're fatigued and you're being judged and you're being watched by your peers and by your coaches, and it's a thing that you're not all that comfortable with. Because honestly, like, we could have said, all right, you're going to go from fighting to then you have to play poker, you know. And if you've never played poker before, if you've rarely played poker before, you're probably going to get there and you're going to be like, oh shit, you know.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
you're,
my
you're
heart
probably
rate
going
would
to experience a heart rate spike because you're like, everybody's watching me. I don't really understand this game that
Yeah.
well, you know. And so you're probably going to have a similar experience.
I was thinking basketball in my head, but poker would do it too.
Yeah.
What's the boxing and chess? Is that
Yeah,
what it
chess
is?
boxing.
Chess boxing. That's wild to me. I had never heard of that before, but similar, almost a similar idea.
Yeah, you box for a round, you play chess, you box, you play chess, you box, you play chess. Yeah. You know, and if you are in that context, let's say you are boxing and you played chess and you went back to boxing and then you came back and all of a sudden somebody had switched out the chessboard for backgammon. You know, and you're like, first of all, you're going to have this reactionary gap, like, wait, what's happening here? And then you're going to be like, because for me, I don't have a clue how to play backgammon. I'd look at this board like I have no idea what to do with this.
I feel like we played it once, and I can't.
I'm going to immediately have my heart rate is going to spike because I'm coming off of doing a thing that I feel relatively comfortable in. However, you're still getting punched in the face. Your heart rate is going to be elevated simply because you're in an actively engaged environment, and then you come back to a thing that you expect, you know, and we go back to the expectations game, and all of a sudden the thing has changed, you know, and it's not just changed from the idea of what I thought was going to be there, but now it's changed to a thing that I don't even know how to do.
Right, a whole new skill set.
Yeah.
So is it your almost chaotic type thoughts trying to catch up that causes that heart rate to spike?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something to that. And when people talk about stress inoculation, I think this is where it kind of comes into play. The more I can put myself into rapidly changing dynamic environments, chaotic environments, the more used to that I become. And I think the quicker I can change from, okay, I was doing this thing and now I'm doing this thing, and I'm actively engaged and I'm not letting it overwhelm me. If I'm not doing that kind of work in whatever it is, whether it's, you know, a training like what we do, or, you know, stressful job or whatever, if I'm not being exposed to that, then it's going to take me longer because my brain, my body, everything has to catch up with the environment, like what's happening right now. So when you talk about reactionary gaps, you know, there's, I think the average is quarter of a second or whatever. And then you move into not just recognizing that a thing has happened, but then decision making and all that stuff and deciding to act. And now, because I'm doing those sorts of things a lot, I start to shorten all that, you know, that those gaps, those decision makings, the movement to act, all that stuff is going a lot faster. Whereas if I'm not being exposed to that sort of chaos, for lack of a better term, then it is going to take me a lot longer to move through those things.
So what's the takeaway if I'm more fight focused and I do this black belt testing and I put the heart rate monitor on, and throughout the fight my heart rate doesn't have those spikes. It stays relatively level.
Yep.
Obviously, when I go to the gun and my heart rate spikes, I realize I need more time on the gun, but also the gun in a little bit more stressful environment, perhaps, where I have done something physical beforehand and that sort of thing. But is there a point where I'm like great, I've mitigated the stress of this situation, or does that mean I need to push more?
I guess it depends on your goals.
Yeah.
You know, considering who we are and what we do, for me, I think for most of our people, it means you need to push more. You know, it's like if you are lifting weights 4 times a week or whatever, you're never getting sore. Well,
Yeah.
your body is acclimated to what you're doing. And so if your goal is to maintain, then maybe that's okay. If your goal is to get stronger, to get bigger, to be more cut, to be, more slim, whatever,
Yeah.
then you're going to have to push. You're going to have to do more weight. You're going to have to get more time under tension. You're going to have to do more reps, whatever it is. And it would be similar here. So the takeaway is, okay, well, from a coaching perspective, if I'm watching somebody's heart rate and I see that during the fight portion, there's a negligible difference. They're not really seeing any sort of increase, then maybe that's an indicator to me as a coach that I need to give them more. I want to push them to a point to where I feel like they are being challenged in a way that is demonstrative of the skills that they should be testing for. You know, if we look at the test we had a couple years ago with Daniel, and I'm looking at Daniel as somebody that physically we don't really have many people that can kind of hold their own with him. Skill set wise, he's incredibly talented.
Will you explain
And
Daniel for
I don't
people
know
who
if
don't
I can.
know?
Big, strong, athletic, left-handed, good wrestling background, good striking background.
Super
a
happy,
giant kid.
pleasant dude. Yeah.
But physically, he's imposing.
Yeah.
And it is very difficult to push him to a place where I think he's being challenged. And so going into that weekend, I had already decided that I was going to figure out a way to make that happen. And I feel like that if I hadn't brought in a couple of ringers, Daniel wouldn't have been challenged. He wouldn't have been pushed in the way that he needed to be.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
For himself mainly, but also for the integrity of a test. So yeah, I think it's goal dependent. If the goal is I want to test where I am, but then maybe look at what the upper limits of that are right now, then yeah, I think if I'm seeing no real movement in heart rate, then that probably means I need a little bit more. Just like right now in my own workouts, I just switched from what I've been doing for months now to a more bodybuilding kind of protocol because I feel like I've been a little stagnant, and I'm 3 days in or whatever, and I'm sore.
Yeah.
And it's a soreness that I haven't really felt in a while. So I think it's a good soreness, but again, it's based on what my goals are.
It's interesting from the fight perspective as a coach because I don't want to say it's easy to challenge somebody, but you could get way out in the weeds and do weird stuff that like strays from their goals because now you're starting them in the dark with a blanket covering their head and their hands zip tied behind their back. And, their heart rate has spiked because they're in this insanely terrible position that they should have fought way earlier in that process. And so, okay, you get that heart rate spike, but now it's like, well, at what benefit?
Right. Yeah, I think scenario training is important, but it's like anything else. Bad scenario training is bad scenario training. Like the returns are at best not helpful and at worst detrimental. Seeing people run scenarios poorly is a huge pet peeve of mine, And usually it's under the guise of it's realistic. I'm doing air quotes for those of you that are listening. And rarely is it. It's Instagram worthy maybe. And it probably gets a lot of views and a lot of shares and bookmarks and whatever. But at the end of the day, the goal shouldn't be how many shares can I get from this video. The goal should be, is my student better than they were before we started this drill or this scenario? And if the answer is no, then I need to reevaluate what I'm doing. Yeah. And that would be the same in a workplace environment or whatever else. If I'm a coach, if I'm a manager, if I'm a business owner or whatever, the goal is to improve the people around me. And yes, I want to push them. And from an employee standpoint, employer standpoint, ownership standpoint, whatever, you want to push people, you want to challenge people, you want them to reach their potential, whatever that means. And, that's a whole rant I could get into on potential. But at some point, it's you're outside of the scope of what you were trying to do or attempting or what their overall goals are or whatever.
Well, so I'm glad you moved that over into the workplace because something I hear a lot And I heard this a lot in school. I was in honors program, AP. Like, I was always with more of the higher achiever kind of side of people. From a school perspective, I know your eyes are glazing over. And one of the things I heard a lot was I work better under pressure. You know, we don't really problem solve under stress. We manage stress to better problem solve. So what do people really mean when they say I work better under pressure?
Yeah, well, I think in some ways it's probably an excuse to procrastinate.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
probably an excuse to
Once I get closer to the
not
deadline.
put the work and time in and whatever. I do think that, well, I know that there are certain people that almost thrive in a chaotic type environment.
Do you happen to be one of those type people?
I
Anti-fragile?
I think I am. Yeah. And I mean, I do procrastinate. I won't deny that. But I also feel that I am at my best creatively, especially when I'm a bit under the gun. When I am, and maybe it's a focus problem. I don't know. When I can look at an assignment, a job, a project, a goal, whatever, and I see, well, this doesn't have to be done for 6 months, 6 weeks, whatever, even 6 days. I also see 18 other things that need to be done. And so it is hard for me to focus on that one thing when I know that I have a lot of time to go. And I guess a lot of time is relative. When I feel like the pressure is on to get a thing done, I become hyper focused and I am able to do a tremendous amount of work in a relatively short period of time. And I am much more creative in that type of environment where there is stress, where there is pressure, where there is an absolute need to get a thing done. And so when people say, well, I'm good under pressure, I do think sometimes it's a crutch, and I've probably done that too. I think sometimes it's people saying things that they've just heard repeated over time because it's a hard thing to measure,
Yeah.
Right. And everybody's definition of pressure is probably a little bit different and performance is probably a little bit different as well. Being a fighter pilot, that's performing under real pressure, real stress versus, well, you gotta get the spreadsheet done by Friday.
Right.
Or your boss is going to be super pissed at you.
Well, and
It's all relative.
sure. And then your experience in that job gets you more familiar with that pressure looks like and feels like. And somebody who's spent a lot of time creating spreadsheets and getting them in before they get fired
Right.
starts getting more comfortable in that place.
Yeah.
And, they would not be happy put in a fighter jet and told to go
Right.
do this operation. That
Right.
would be terribly stressful versus the one that has gone regularly and jumps in and just goes and does it.
Yeah.
It's
And
what-
the danger becomes, and maybe danger isn't the right word, but it's like anything. We keep pushing the limits of that. I crushed this presentation last time, and I started on it 2 days out, so I give it another
that
day.
reward is,
And at some point it's going to be negative returns. I can only push that so far before it's going to
actually
weigh
bite
on me.
you.
It's going to
Yeah.
push back.
I heard that, and I can't remember. It was some Instagram video. I wasn't even preparing for this. I just happened to see it relatively recently, and it resonated with me. And that's the idea that work, tasks, project, whatever, is more like a liquid than anything. Even if it's a task that should probably take you 2 hours, if you have 6 hours to do it in, it's going to take 6 hours. And not to sit here and preach, time blocking or whatever random productivity things can go with that. It's a similar idea where we have to put the pressure on ourselves to actually get the things done in the time frame that we want them to happen in. But that itself can create stress. And so what I'm sort of thinking about right now is the first time you experience your toddler throw a tantrum. Your heart rate probably spikes and you're like, I need to get them to stop right now as fast as I can. And it seems like this big, huge thing. And then the 800th time your toddler throws a tantrum, okay, this is going to take however long and they're going to calm down and they're going to get out of it. And these are the things and the steps that I need to do to help or whatever it is.
Right.
But you've started to figure out the process and the time it takes.
In that scenario, I think that, there's something to like the first time or two, you're like, what is wrong with this thing?
This thing is broken.
I do think, and I'm going to generalize and stereotype here. Even with that, I do think there's some gender differences as well. I see it in our centers, but I've seen it throughout life, where moms might be more inclined to immediately go to soothing and trying to, where dads are maybe more inclined to be like, you know what, he's just going to have to
lose it here in the middle of the aisle.
He's just going to have to work through that, you know. That may have something to do with the way they were brought up or, whatever. I don't know, the nature nurture kind of thing. But in that scenario, in that situation, I mean, I see this much more readily on a gender side. I mean, we have had thousands of kids come through our centers, over the years. Usually if a kid gets touched up a little bit more or whatever, it's the moms that I'm hearing from. It's rarely the dads that I'm hearing from.
Right.
Kid cries, whatever. Now, again, there's some exceptions. A dad with a daughter tends to be a little different.
Yeah. And it's things you see.
Yep.
And, we experienced this a good bit, taking the fight idea of stress and where we feel comfortable and that sort of thing into travel, managing flight cancellations and delays and changes and this sort of thing. And I feel like we're both pretty good at keeping composure because we've both traveled a ton.
Yeah. I actually think you're better at that than I am.
Oh, well, thank you.
The incompetence of those systems start to wear on me a good bit,
But there are some crazy, we have to get this faxed printout of this manifest from whatever, and you're like...
There are things that, from a practical standpoint that you look at and as a normal, rational human, but also especially as a small business owner, you're like, how can a multi-billion-dollar company or industry not figure this out?
Yeah.
And so I probably don't handle those things as well as I would like to. But I will say I handle them better than I probably used to.
I mean, for our dynamic, I'm typically the one that's downloaded the app. I've made sure pre-check numbers are on boarding passes. Oh, look at that. Weird. I'm the planner. And then you're the one when the plans go awry to be like, hey, we have to switch. Right. And I'm like, oh, okay, fine, if you say so.
Yes.
It works out for us.
And I think we've talked about support systems and things like that before. I think having people around you, especially the people that are closest to you, that can snap you out of, you're in a highly pressurized kind of situation. It's stressful. It's starting to wear you down, whatever. It's important to have people around you to help you reframe and understand, look, I get why you're stressed about this, and I understand the pressure that you're under or whatever, but this too shall pass and it's going to be okay. And, because if everybody around you is running around like a chicken with their head cut off, then it's going to just get worse. It's going to feed on itself. You need people that are playing the contrarian to a degree, there to kind of push back on your sky is falling kind of mentality.
Yeah. That's like the puzzles we looked at. You almost need somebody to tell you it's okay to break the rules, or it's okay to do this, or we talk about it a ton in active killer defense with teachers who are rule followers, and they need someone telling them it's okay to fight back. It's okay to use your best judgment in a situation.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, in that situation, they're quite often being told by administrators, school boards, superintendents, law enforcement, whoever, this is the procedure, this is the protocol, this is what's in black and white, this is what you're going to do. And while they may know, because they're the ones that ultimately are in the room, and we're talking about stress, we're talking about pressure, it's rarely going to be higher than this, harder than this.
An incredible amount of circumstances, too, variables that you can't really predict.
Yes. And so while they may know that what they're being told and what is written down on paper doesn't really make sense, they almost need permission from somebody else to be like, look, I understand why these things exist and why they're in place, but as well as I know that when things go sideways. This does not work.
Yeah.
And here are some options.
So I read an article on predicting athletic performance.
Okay.
That's what got me on this line of thinking, which is this idea of challenge versus threat. So some athletes experience a positive motivational state as, you know, a challenge, and others experience a negative motivational state, a threat. And athletes who look at things as challenges versus threats tend to do better, whether they are, you know, in the heat of a game or even at practice or whatever's happening. They perceive things as challenges, not necessarily as threats. And I never really thought about how very similar those two things are, and yet very different.
Yeah.
It's almost just positive connotation, negative connotation, but almost interchangeable words, really. And if we talk about the airport changing our flight, delays, whatever, I'm more likely to see that as challenge. Okay, next thing, how do we figure this out? That sort of thing. Where you're more threat, this person's incompetent, this multi-million-dollar industry can't figure this out. Why are they doing it this way? And not to give a positive negative connotation, of course, but the way you perceive it initially allows you to handle it better or worse, or you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah. There's it's a Netflix documentary, and it escapes me now the name of it, which is going to annoy me through the rest of this, but it's about Michael Jordan, and it's a 10-piece kind of thing. It's a really good insight into somebody at the highest level of athletic performance and how he saw other players and the things that they would say and the things that they would do, and he would take it personally almost, and how it drove him, and really, I think, I mean, obviously he had athletic attributes that allowed him to be transcendent, but I think his mindset, his mentality of taking on a challenge and being like, all right, well, you score 30, I'm going to score 50, you know?
Yeah.
You know, Tim Grover was one of his trainers, and, you know, Tim Grover is author of Relentless and a couple of other things. He talks about cleaners, you know, and Michael Jordan is
Absolutely.
the
epitome
of a cleaner.
Yeah.
And this idea of, you know, I don't think Michael Jordan ever felt threatened. He was often challenged, but
Yes.
I don't think he ever felt threatened, you know. And you know this from interactions with me, especially on a business level. I thrive when somebody is
Poking the bear.
yeah, like it's kind of the thing that we talked about, you know, being under stress and how pressure drives my creativity. When that pressure is being applied from an outside source, and I feel like it's from a negative kind of place, I don't take it as a threat. You know, I'm not threatened by these people. I'm not threatened by who they are or what they're doing. I don't, you know, I don't look at things that way.
Yeah.
But I love the challenge.
Yeah.
You know, it literally rejuvenates me in a way, you know. And so for anybody listening out there, just know if you come for me, be ready, because I don't fuck around.
I have no idea what you're talking about right now. When you put it that way, being threatened, being challenged, threatened does sound like shrinking away type of thing, like, and almost man, I hope they don't.
Right.
Like, you more put it on them versus challenged sounds like, okay,
I wish
bet.
a motherfucker would.
Right. Bigger, more robust, and more, well, I'm gonna beat you. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I do. And you know, it's like, I mean, to a degree, it's like anything else. Anything can be taken to an extreme, but it's like we talk about with wall work, or we talk about with apparel grabs, or we talk about the ground or whatever. My perception of those things is going to play a huge role in how I deal with them and what the overall outcome is like. If I view the wall, me being pinned against the wall, as a problem, then it's going to be a problem. If I view somebody grabbing my shirt as a problem, then it's going to be a problem. If I view the ground and me being on my back as a problem, then it's going to be a problem. That doesn't mean that I want to be on the ground necessarily, but I also don't want to treat it as lava, and now all of a sudden I feel threatened and I make mistakes. I overreact. That's where I think people in life, business, relationships, work, whatever it is, they mess up. They see a threat and they overreact to it. And overreactions tend to cause mistakes. And if I'm in a heightened state of heart rate, adrenal, whatever, and I'm making mistakes, they tend to snowball, Whereas I see this as a challenge, I am less likely to have this overreaction that leads to mistakes, that leads to this kind of snowball effect of this thing can go sideways really, really quickly. Oh, you pin me against a wall. Here's 180 degrees I don't have to worry about. Oh, you grab my shirt. Now I know one of your hands is tied up. Both of mine are free. I'm on my back. There's another 180 degrees and I don't have to worry about,
Yeah. I would have been okay standing. I would have been okay not against the
Right.
wall, but I'm also okay against the wall. I'm okay on the back.
I am prepared for this. Yes. Maybe this isn't where I would have chosen to be
Where
in this
I
moment.
planned to be. Yeah.
But it's not unfamiliar to me. I'm not going to freak out over it. You're not going to get me to make a mistake because you have put me in a position that I feel like I cannot handle. And I think that's the biggest difference between being challenged and being. And I know you didn't use the word threatened. You used threat. But when I hear challenge versus threat, I hear challenged versus threatened.
I think that's a better way to look at it.
And I think it gives a better picture of how people perceive things.
Yeah. It puts it more in a personal perspective and not so, well, that thing is a challenge, that thing is a threat. It's more how it affects me versus just kind of what it is, which is what we're talking about.
Right.
And really everything that we've covered is about metacognition and awareness of your thinking and thought patterns.
That's a big word.
Yeah, that's why I defined it. But, of course, I waited till the end.
Define it again, because I wasn't really listening.
Metacognition is the awareness of your thinking and thought patterns.
Okay.
And the reason you're struggling with this right now, are you ready? Is because when we were forming metacognition, it was in school and teachers said, explain your work. And what did you do?
I said, well, this is dumb. Why does
This
this
is
matter?
the answer. Why does it matter how I got there? I know. Without knowing, I knew. No, and not that
My
that's-
daughter also has this problem.
Yes. Well, yes. Obviously, there are other ways to develop this. I do think that is some of the goal within learning and school. But yeah, we'll put that to the side. Anyway, all of this has been that internal dialogue, that an awareness of, I'm pinned against the wall. What am I thinking right now? And if we could almost freeze time or within the heart rate monitors also record inner thoughts, I think that would tell us a lot, and that would be terrible, but it would also tell us a lot about why the heart rate spiked.
Right.
Do you remember The Chair? It's a terrible game show. I don't know if it's terrible by my standards. I don't know if the world agrees, but
I'm not really a game show person, so I don't.
you get a heart monitor and different things set up to basically judge heart rate. I think it's the only thing they really register, but they put you in this chair, they strap you in, and
I already don't like that.
they bring you up onto the stage, and you have to keep your heart rate at a certain level, a certain percentage of your base rate.
Okay.
And throughout the game show, they lower that threshold. And they do different challenges and different things to put you under stress. They shoot up fire, or they pop things out at you, things like that. And then obviously you have your own pressure and stress that you're putting on you because you're either about to win $300,000 or you might lose it all if your heart rate goes too high. If your heart rate's above the threshold, they start taking money away from you that you've earned. It's kind of involved, really. And I wish we could also isolate the thought patterns there.
Yeah.
Because once your heart rate gets above that threshold and you're losing money, the tendency is now to spiral. Oh, shoot, I have to get my heart rate down or I'm losing money. Now it matters. And so
The more you think about it, yes.
Yeah. And then the people who do calm themselves down, because there was plenty of that on the show.
Right.
What were they thinking? Do they have a mantra? Do they have a place they went in their head? Did they just do it because they could control their heart rate better?
Yeah.
And I did think it's interesting that game show didn't let you close your eyes. Because I do feel like when I'm thinking about calming myself down, probably the first thing I do is close my eyes and breathe.
Yeah.
And so I guess if you're going on that game show, prepare to not do that. Start learning how to calm yourself down other ways. But it would be interesting to know what the internal dialogue is going on, what the thought process is.
Yeah.
And then, same in work and relationships. And
yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that's the case here, but I do think there's something to ignorance is bliss as well.
Yeah.
If I'm overall not ignorant is quite in quite the word for this context, but if I'm overall unconcerned
Yes.
about what's going on around me, you know,
Mm-hmm.
then I'm much more likely to be able to
Yeah.
walk through it, deal
Yeah.
with it, whatever it is. Maybe there's a stakes game there. I mean, there's no shortage of, you can find videos, and people like this, whatever, when everybody else is running around losing their minds and, hair on fire and whatever. And there are those people that are taking it all in and watching, and it's like, they're not participating in the group monkey dance
Yeah.
that's happening in the chaos.
They can find some serenity in that
Yeah.
chaos and take the time to isolate what's happening and what they need to do and make proper decisions. And I think the benefit we have in the fight world and being comfortable under that type of pressure is we get to feel that serenity in real time.
Yeah.
We've experienced what it's like to get to that level in fighting. And so we have a better idea of what it's going to look like to develop it in other areas of life, in relationships, in the chaos of kids or family and those sort of dynamics, sickness, health, whatever's going on, or in your work life, whether it's owning a small business or being employed. As chaos sets in, realizing that you can be calm in that chaos and still come out okay on the other side.
Well,
You
one,
don't.
one one of the things that we say often in classes, or I say at least, is the first time you get punched in the face should not be when you're in a parking lot between two cars with your 3-year-old holding onto your hand.
Yeah.
You know, you should know long before that I can be punched in the face. It's going to be okay. I've been here before. Obviously the context is going to be very different. The stakes are much higher. You can't actually replicate
Right. Yeah.
that particular scenario. However, if your body has felt that hit before, if your mind has processed that before, then you are much more likely to be able to deal with it when it's for real than not.
Yeah.
So that kind of stress, that kind of pressure, having been there before, even if it's on just a peripheral kind of place, I think is important. And I think this is where you see it in martial arts. I think you see it in academia. Theory can only get you so far.
Yeah.
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 At some point, you got to just get punched in the face. You want to learn how to swim. At some point, you got to get wet. If you don't know how to swim, I could bring Michael Phelps in here, or Michael Phelps's coaches, or whatever, and they could take you through all the motions, and they could give you all the drills and all the movements and all the things, but you've never been in the water before, and then I take you out in the middle of the lake and I drop you in that water, you're probably dead. When it comes to fighting, self-defense, whatever it is, we can talk about it all we want. You want to get good at push-ups, we can talk about that all you want.
Yeah. You got to
But
do them at
ultimately,
some point.
you got to actually do them to get the results that you're looking for. And when it comes to physical fitness, and we talked about this with the black belt test, or martial arts, or self-defense, or life goals, or whatever. Once I've reached the upper limits of whatever threshold I've established, then I either am okay with that, or I need to raise the threshold, which is going to mean more variables, more stress, more pressure, more weight,
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Yeah. There's a danger to sitting comfortably somewhere.
Yeah.
In all aspects of life.
Right. Sometimes it's a literal danger. It's an actual danger. You get too comfortable in certain aspects of life. It can be the difference between you surviving or not. Whether that's thinking that, well, I live in this gated community and bad things don't happen here, or thinking, well, I bench 500 pounds, I'm not worried about that. I drink 4 energy drinks a day and I do 0 cardio,
Yeah.
comfortability obviously is a relative term, but it when you see it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, when somebody has gotten comfortable.
And you don't always see the danger. That's where you rely on community.
Yeah.
I mean, you might be comfortable. You grew up in a chaotic home life where people hit each other regularly, and now you're living in a life where that's the case as well. And you think that's fine and normal, and it's what you know and almost what you seek out. And
Well, it is normal to you.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Like it literally
Yeah.
is normal to you.
Yes.
And so,
And again, you probably seek it out because of that.
yeah,
There's
it's what you
comfort
know.
in
There's
it.
comfort in
Yeah.
it. And as crazy as that may seem to other people, we all have aspects of that. Obviously not to that extreme, but we all have aspects of things that we are okay with, we are comfortable with, that other people look at like, what is wrong? Like, why do they do that? Or why do they tolerate that? Or why do they put up with this person or whatever it is? And I don't think that's always a negative. Like that, I don't think it has to be. Just because somebody else doesn't understand the way that I do things doesn't mean that it's a negative thing. Those are the easier ones to kind of define. But like I can look at people that run 3 miles a day or 5 miles a day or whatever, and I'm like, well, that's freaking insane. Why do you do that to yourself? That doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong or bad or whatever. I think it's wrong, but I don't get it. I don't understand it, but that doesn't make it a bad thing.
But that's both sides of community. You don't understand rock climbing. I really enjoy it, and I have groups and Instagrammers and whatever that I follow, and we speak the same language and find enjoyment from it in the same way. And then, you're good for other things, like how comfortable I am snacking 24/7. And you're like, are you real? What you doing? You're calling from me from the living room. What you doing? Because I'm rattling a bag in the pantry like a
Raccoon.
dog, like a raccoon. Like a raccoon.
Uh-huh.
Yep. Yeah, you're right. Okay.
Yep.
So.
I had a raccoon as a kid. I know.
Dang it, I want a raccoon so badly.
You're basically the same.
Oh, okay. Well, good. Look, I have a raccoon.
Yeah. No, I have a raccoon. You are a raccoon.
You're welcome. That's our look at the serenity of fighting. If you enjoyed this discussion, please leave us 5
weird.
stars. Yeah, what's wrong with you? Are you comfortable listening to this? What happened? Follow, share, subscribe, all the things. Please join the conversation on social media.
Do it fast before we quit.
Apparently. If you didn't enjoy this podcast, overreact by commenting on everything we've ever posted. Thanks for listening to Second Plan A. We look forward to growing with you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
If there is a next time.
Yeah.